Like, he seems super evil, but they humanize him in a way where they don't with the other characters. There's the duel where Zuko wins and he goes to blast right by his head, and the guy fires back, "You coward. Your father would be ashamed of you," which is great. It builds up, the ominous character that is Zuko's dad.
Dragon claw, wing and scale. Come now, let's examine a tale of the greatest beast ever considered. Another episode of Big Flying Lizards.
Welcome, everyone, to Big Flying Lizards. I am your host, Bryce Wilson. I am joined today by Chayce, the Last Airbender, possibly. To give a little background, Chayce and I have been friends for quite a while. We were actually personal trainers at the glorious gym, Vasa Fitness, down in St. George. And honestly, not to get too emotional here, especially since I have somebody with a sticky note arrow on their forehead in front of me.
Dude, this is a real arrow. You're going to get airbended so hard right now.
Yeah, it is. But Chayce is honestly one of the people that has really helped me, motivated me. One way I'd say Chayce, he does not hold back. If he sees you messing up, he will tell you that you're messing up. If he sees that you think you're just top shit when you're not, he will tell you. And honestly, I needed that at a point in my life, and friendship was born out of just his brutal honesty. And I feel like we all need a Chayce in our lives to keep us humble, but also just make everything going. But I really am glad that you are here today to discuss arguably one of the greatest TV shows of all time.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here. Happy to be your friend. And I have gotten a lot nicer as the years have gone on.
You don't need to lie on the podcast. It's all good.
Yeah. I'm not really an airbender. I'm a backbender.
Just because it is listed as explicit doesn't mean that you need to be as explicit as possible.
I thought that was funny and I couldn't let it go. Anyway.
It was hilarious. It was absolutely
great.
Well, as we alluded to earlier, what we are discussing today is Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Let's just do it. Get in this.
Avatar: The Last Airbender is an American animated fantasy action television series created by Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, and it's produced by Nickelodeon Animation Studio. Book 1, Water, is the first season, aired from February 21st to December 2nd, 2005. Avatar is set in a largely Asian-inspired world, which some people can manipulate one of the four elements, water, earth, fire, and air, through practices known as bending, inspired by Chinese martial arts. The only individual who can bend all four elements is the Avatar. The series follows the journey of a 12-year-old named Aang, the current Avatar and the last surviving of his nation, the Air Nomads, along with his friends Katara and Sokka, as they strive to end the war with the Fire Nation and to defeat Fire Lord Ozai. The series also follows Zuko, an exiled prince of the Fire Nation, seeking to restore his lost honor by capturing Aang, accompanied by his uncle Iroh. Each episode of the season attracted more than 1 million viewers in its first airing and received widespread acclaim from critics and audiences, with high praises for its characters, culture references, art direction, voice acting, soundtrack, humor, and thematic content. The series' themes includes concepts rarely touched on in youth entertainment, including war, genocide, sexism/gender roles, imperialism, class warfare, political corruption, indoctrination, animal cruelty, and free choice. It won several awards, and since its release, the show has been regarded by critics as one of the most acclaimed series of the 21st century and one of the greatest animated TV shows of all time. With that being said, Chayce, off of these first 6 episodes, what are your first thoughts on Avatar: The Last Airbender?
I think what we do is we take a step back. And I think we open up the age-old argument of, is it anime?
I think that is definitely worth a conversation worth having. So I'm going to give you the floor to make the case for or against. Where do you land on it?
To be honest with you, I think it's a bit of both. I think it's like not a traditional anime because that's just the nature of it. But I will say, I think this TV show in particular has gotten more people. This is a gateway drug to Naruto, and you can't prove me wrong. Like, I think this TV show really for its time, and this is kind of what we'll get into as well of just what it does so well. But I think that this has been such a good opening to so many kids. I mean, this came out in 2005.
Yeah.
Is that what you said? Come out in 2005. Like, there was nothing really quite like this as far as like a hybrid for anime. Like, unless you were watching like Adult Swim and staying up and getting into that world, which I obviously was. But that's a whole other conversation. I think it's probably got to be one of the best entries into the world of animation, specifically Japanese animation, I think. And I think for a lot of people, opened a lot of doors, even into like, different fantasy things that way. I really do think it opened a lot of doors.
No, it's one of those shows that, I mean, we also have to remember this is before streaming. Like, this was back when you had to watch shows like on TV. Like,
yeah, that's so
just
true.
saying that, I can feel the back pain developing in my knees giving out on me.
Real.
But for me in particular, I grew up with the rabbit ears antenna, so I did not have a wide variety of TV options. So for me, my family would just download FBI, hold back on this. We would just download them straight offline and have it on our computer. And that's how we watched it each week. And so it was one of those things where the day after it dropped, I had to avoid all my friends that were like actually watching it because this show was popping. Like, everybody.
I mean, it's interesting you say that because I had the exact opposite where I don't remember anyone talking about it.
Really?
I'm also from the middle of nowhere, but I don't remember like I remember watching it on TV, but I do not remember anybody talking about it at all.
Dude, like my friend group, that's really all we talked about was like, oh,
really,
gosh, this is so good. Like,
that's super interesting, actually, because like I said, I did not have that experience in the slightest.
Well, also, like you said, you grew up in a very scarcely populated area.
Yeah. All 5,000 of us, there wasn't a ton of the Last Airbender coming out.
It's funny to say that, though, but I really think that Netflix, like, obviously this show was a big deal. 1 million people were tuning in for each episode, but I really think that Netflix just made the show explode because when it went on, it started going everywhere. And nobody was even talking about, well, we don't talk about the live action movie that came out. That thing was garbage. But other than that, like, nobody was talking about doing a live action adaptation of a show until they saw how successful this movie was. I mean, it was on Netflix. So
yeah, 100%. I think that's a good segue into like one of my first points of watching, as I was watching back through this for, I've been through the series a couple times. I think even in today's standards, I think by today's standards, this is still one of the best TV shows of making it interesting the first episode.
Yes.
Like, it introduces the entire plot and all of the main characters within the first episode, which is just not, still is not, like, every TV show you can hear about these days, it's like, hey, even Game of Thrones, it's like, just get to episode 4 or 5. I promise you, after 5 hours of your life, like, it gets interesting. This one gets interesting in 20 minutes. And I think it does such a good job of that. I think I was watching the first bit and I was like, and it makes it interesting from the bat. And then you have like a little lull, but off the bat, you're introduced to 2 main characters and you get a sense of who everyone is super quickly.
Yeah. No, so last week during the stream, I mentioned that Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is one of my favorite animes. And
Great.
I see a lot of parallels, at least in tone and conversation, between the shows. Obviously, Brotherhood is a lot darker of a show in general, but what I mean is, like, both of the shows will have these lulls where it'll be like super kid friendly or like almost goofy, like, what are we watching here? And then it'll take such a right turn pivot and go like get super real, talk about just the darker side of human nature.
Absolutely.
We'll talk about it in a bit, but just to get a little bit ahead, There's the episode with King Bumi, which is literally like, what is going on? Like, this is just a guy trolling his friend for an entire episode.
Yeah.
And then it literally goes into prisoner of war camps where they're forcing them to do like slave labor, essentially, like all in the span of 40 minutes. Like,
absolutely. And well, it's set up. I mean, obviously we're way ahead of ourselves, but they don't make a lot of TV shows now where they felt like you were watching them week to week. Everything's super continuous. And this one truly felt like you were reading multiple stories about this, right? And I think that's a really cool story writing style. And once again, not something you see a lot of nowadays with any of the shows.
Going back, I just wanted to dive in a real quick about your initial question about whether it's an anime. Anime is a state of mind, right? Like, it's not.
That's silly.
I remember when I was rewatching it right when it got put back onto Netflix. I was actually watching it with Austin and his brother, and right when we finished it up, it was during college. I was doing all sorts of great things to just really enhance my living experience. And I started watching Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood after completing Avatar, and I was just, the tones were so similar that I was like, when is Aang gonna show up? Like, who's this robot kid? Is he related to Toph? Is like,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's. I do think that like, obviously it's not anime because anime is like a Japanese thing, but at the same time, there's people that are saying that Arcane, which I don't know if you've watched it. I know I've told you to watch.
I have not gotten into it yet.
Amazing. My favorite thing Netflix has ever created themselves, but that's neither here nor there. But people are saying that Arcane is like American anime, and I'm like, okay, if they can say that that's American anime, what's wrong with saying that Avatar: Last Airbender is anime? Because it's literally just the same thing as anime, except for maybe like the faces are a little different. If that,
I mean, there's some particular styles, but I mean, not by far. You know, like we could get nitty gritty about it, but I really do. I think that it really did get so many people into like, it was such a game. Like it was that. It was just accessible, and there was nothing like that once again on Nickelodeon.
I would even argue, and I know that there's some shows that people absolutely love and adore, but I would argue that there's not only there wasn't anything else on Nickelodeon, but I don't think there's been anything on Nickelodeon really since. Like, I know that's us just being old, but like they don't make it like they used to, Chayce.
No, they really. I mean, I think that's been. I mean, once again, I'm gonna disagree with you because Danny Phantom went hard, but it definitely, that was not even close to anime, but that animated would have been sick. I had
very limited exposure to Danny Phantom, so please forgive this.
You don't understand what it's like to go ghost. And then there's, that's a whole other conversation. We get, that'd be an interesting, this Nickelodeon TV. Like you got is it Ben 10?
Yeah, that was like Nickelodeon's
bread and butter.
Exactly. That was during their prime time. They were going hard with everything. But is there anything else that we want to dive into overall about the show before we actually start talking about the individual episodes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think overall, I think we've covered like some interesting stuff. I think that once again, overall, when I think of like, I have used this show as an introduction for so many people. And I think this show, because of the Netflix adapt, like, later on, means something to different. I think you kind of do have like a generational, because you had everyone that was originally into it, and it's a nostalgic thing. But then you have the crowd that, it was basically during COVID, if I remember right, just before, everyone was binge watching Avatar: Last Airbender. So it kind of becomes a TV show that, despite its, being a cartoon, does tend to just land well with everybody. Like, I can't think of a demographic that this show wouldn't land well with, which once again is super interesting given the topics that are had, but also just the animation and style like that. Like it really does land with everybody. And once again, you just don't see that with very many TV shows that across the board. You're like, wow, you could be 3 and I guarantee a grandparent could sit down and watch that TV show and be like, oh, like that was cute. Like it was good. And so it does that while also not being generic, which is super rare.
Yes, the world building's amazing. The lore is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The music, for something that is consistently brought up, the music is just phenomenal. Like there's not a weak moment.
No, I agree. But
one thing that I will say that I especially it's just so crazy for me to think is like, even when I was going over, I knew that it was more of it had some more progressive ideals and messages that it wanted to bring forward. But even just looking back at a couple of these first episodes, it's just so shocking to me how, I mean, this is 2005, like, and it was having some of these progressive messages. I've referenced before that it is like, it's awesome, but it's also shocking that they made like a blind girl who's like, we won't be talking about Toph today, but Toph was a blind girl who's like 3 or so years younger than everybody, and she's easily the most badass character out of them all. Like, she's beating the shit out of everybody.
mm-hmm.
Everyone's like, that's awesome. We love it. Like, she's great. Like, I imagine that if there was a similar character, if you were to copy and paste Toph and just do it in a different world, there'd be people that'd be angry about.
Yeah, I agree with that. But also, what came first? Buttercup, Powerpuff Girl, or Toph? Things that feel the same but are different.
True. Very true. But Toph's blind.
Okay, like I said, it feels the same. Now you're being weird about it.
Oh,
Buttercup was number one. That was my favorite Powerpuff Girl.
I think
5 seconds. We're talking about Powerpuff Girls.
That's all I think. I think you were just trying to find that segue into.
I was just looking for my in.
Alrighty. Well,
I agree with you. The world building's amazing. But I mean, once again, last thing, and then we'll transition. But it's they do cool. Like, for example, Toph's parents are loaded rich, but like they show so much variety throughout the show, which once again just aids to the richness of the story.
No, I completely agree. But we'll go ahead and dive into the actual episode discussion. How we're going to be formatting this is we're going to be talking about episodes 1 through 6. The chapters that we'll be doing. Chapter 1, we'll be doing episode 1 and 2. Chapter 2, we'll be doing episode 3 and 4. And then at the chapter 3, we'll be doing episodes 5 and 6. So with this first chapter, we are going to be going over the following. 100 years have passed since the Fire Nation launched a devastating war against the other nations, plunging the world into chaos. The once harmonious balance upheld by the Avatar was shattered. The Avatar, master of all 4 elements, vanished when the world needed him most, leaving the other nations to fend for themselves. Now that the Fire Nation is on the brink of victory, hope dwindles for the remaining defenders of freedom. Katara, a Water Nation girl, accidentally frees Aang, the last air nomad who has been frozen for 100 years. Aang is unaware of the Fire Nation's century-long war. Aang learns that Katara is a waterbender. While exploring an old Fire Nation warship, they alert Prince Zuko of the Fire Nation of their location, forcing Aang to be banished from the village. Zuko attacks the village, which causes Aang to return and protect his friends, and surrenders to Zuko to spare them. Katara and Sokka rescue Aang. Aang escapes Zuko's ship by unleashing the Avatar state to defeat Zuko and his crew. Aang expresses his reluctance to be the Avatar, but they set out to go to the North Pole to train in waterbending. So, like you said before, solid, just pilot episode. It
Covers it all.
It really does. There's so many, the animation style, like, I really don't think it gets too much, like, throughout the show, I don't see too much of a progression in the animation, but I'm not saying that, they just plateaued. Like, I just think it was just that good starting out that they didn't necessarily, obviously they add more special effects, but just like, you'll see some shows and it just progressively, like, you can see everything is better. This one,
Yeah, I agree with you. I think around chapter 3, it's where you really see the biggest difference. And it's mostly just in a clarity, right? Like, it's like when you watch the pilot episode, you're like, okay, like, this does feel like 2005, but not in a bad way, in an amusement parks and ice cream way, but not, not the divorce, but, Okay. No, that's another stat. How many kids watched The Last Airbender while their parents were fighting?
Well, I mean, I was probably going to save this for later on because in this first chapter, Uncle Iroh just seems like a bumbling idiot. He doesn't seem like too much of a father figure as he is. But I mean, we've seen it online. Uncle Iroh has helped. He is all of our uncles. Like he is a
absolutely
kind of uncle.
Exactly. It really was there, and I think that's some good points to get on. I think getting back to the first episode, I think something I noticed as I was rewatching it back, and this is actually such a great point with Uncle Iroh. I feel like Aang plays so much dumber than he is. There's no way that he gets frozen and comes out and then is just like nothing is different, you know? And especially when you think that he's Avatar, the wisdom that he's had and the training that he's had. So to me, it's a really interesting thing because you have like a really wide, you know, when you look at his character arc over the show, but we go down and you go, it's like the absolute peak emotionally immature kid, but like such a wise kid. And to me, this actually, like, I think it's kind of funny looking back of like how actually, I don't want to use the word evil, but like how bad it is for him to come back. And you see this as we go through the episodes of like him like realizing how long he's been frozen. But you just see, you're looking back at it and you're like, you know exactly who you are and what it is, right? Like the absolute actual denial that he comes back into the series with, which I think lends itself to some of the playfulness in the beginning of the like series of him, you know, just like, no, he doesn't want to work at all. He just wants to play and have that connection because he's never had it. But almost to the spite of like, no, you're the average, you know, you've been trained for years. Like the wisdom is there.
I actually was that I'm glad you brought that up because that was something I really wanted to dive into because in the first two episodes, I feel like there was two messages that they were really trying to just bring home to us as the viewers. The first message is that bending is not magic. It's bending. Like
they say that. The lady says that.
They say it twice. They say it twice without the show. And so to me, I'm like, okay. And then they never mention magic again, I'm pretty sure, in the show. So the first thing, that bending is not magic. It's its own thing. And the second thing, something that got consistently brought up, is that they are children. Like Sokka, Katara, and Aang are kids. Like I'm pretty sure that it's said either 2 or 3 times within the first part of this episode that they are just kids and they have the weight of the world to save the world and stop essentially like animated Hitler over here from taking over the world. Like that's the that's the idea of it right now.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point of, you know, because it's one, like if you go back to one of the you know, first opening scenes where they're like fishing, and Sokka truly does happen through the lens of what happens in a young boy's imagination, right? Like, I'm fishing, I'm going to be like, you can just see it, you know, and it makes so much sense why the TV show is so relatable, because it's, you know, me and you are looking at it now, we're going, oh yeah, like that's, you know, that's the you know, you can see it on him. But I think as kids watching that, you know, back in 2005, it's like, oh wow, that's what I want to do. You know, I have sticks and I'm whacking at weeds or what, you know, like everyone wanted a sword. Everybody wanted a sword. And, you know, like you would do what you needed to. And so I think you see a lot of that in the characters, right? And even the insecurity of, and once again, the, you know, progressive topics as far as like, you know, she's trying to become a bender and she doesn't have the training, but like it's also untraditional for her to do so in a very traditional clan, you know, just things like that. Like there's some, you know, easy spots where you can see the relatability to people or to, I guess, characters, you know, that would be common in a sense.
No, and I actually really want to dive into the conversation of just Sokka as a character, but I'm going to save it for the second chapter. We do get a sense of is that like undertone of sexism in the first episode, because he is just being sort of insensitive to Katara, and that's what made Katara actually discover Sokka, is just having her explosion at him, just being
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But I definitely do think in this first episode, there's so many messages that you already see being built up, both in the sense, like both for Sokka and Katara. Sokka is almost a product of when you are putting somebody in a position of leadership or a position of being a role model too early. Because Sokka is, like, in this first episode, Sokka, in the first 2 episodes, Sokka is a buzzkill. Like, he's a straight up just asshole, and he's not really that enjoyable. But you come to find out that all the men of the tribe have been gone for 2 years, and they left Sokka, and he's the oldest man in the tribe. And so it's his responsibility to look over. I mean, it's the joke that all the rest of the troops are like the toddlers.
No, seriously though, like they're legit toddlers.
But that, like, if you think about it, this is a world at war, and they only have one. I believe Sokka is 16. He's either 15 or 16, but he's there, and he's there to defend them. And so, I mean, I've seen people that are forced to grow up at a young age like that, and it takes people in all sorts of different directions. And I think that Aang was forced to grow up too fast, but he's not the only one. Like, I feel like everybody in their own right was supposed, like, they grew up too fast in this world.
Yeah, absolutely, especially with the internet. And I think that's a great point. And I think that, I don't know, in Sokka, like I said, there's a lot to his story. Is, I think, one of the most slept on in the story in all of Avatar, because he doesn't have a very linear, character arc at all. And I think that's one thing, like you're stating on, like, they're sending some really strong points home which is funny because it doesn't even feel like a pilot, right? Like any of those things. But I think some of the points, like, to me, that once again we're going to be creating that's going to be really interesting is Iroh. We get the introduction to the bumbling uncle, and it's interesting looking back at it now, how him and Aang's character arcs are so intertwined, in a sense of, like, almost literally you can see as Uncle Iroh loses his facade of the bumbling uncle, is also as Aang matures at the same time, and the role they end up playing in the better scheme of things. But you just meet them both early. And one of the key story points I really thought was interesting that I hadn't noticed till this next watch around is when Uncle Iroh's on the ship and he's playing Feng Shui. What is the game? The little card game.
I'll have it up next week.
Yeah, which I should have had some jasmine tea here, by the way. But when he has those boards down, and the one thing I noticed is that it makes a very big point to watch what cards he put down, and almost all of them, if I remember correctly, are the same things, as if the 4 elements are aligning themselves again, right? And in that wiseness that was there with him, but you don't see until later in the series. And like I said, it's just interesting looking back, and you see with Sokka, and he kind of stays that way for a while, most of the series, right? And it's almost like that skill set eventually becomes useful. But with everything else going on, it's super interesting watching them start it off and really drive home the starting point of these characters. They really did such an enunciation of that, of like, hey, this is where they're starting. You look at Avatar, it's such an easy way to measure. You can measure the characters, on a scale, look really well that way.
No, I completely agree on that front. I will just say this. When Zuko landed in the Water Nation tribe, I feel like, even though, like, yes, it's a kid show, it went hard. Like, it just a metal boat that came in, just destroying everything. And I think that it did a great job of just relaying on how powerful the Fire Nation actually is. Because you do think about, like, okay, it's essentially 3 against 1. It's the 3 other nations against 1 nation. How did the Fire Nation get this point? And you can see that they just have technology that's well more advanced, and they aren't messing around, apparently.
Yeah, no, and I think it's, once again, you see that in the art styles, right? Everything else is flowy. The Fire Nation is such the colors and all of that. And I agree. And I'm actually glad you brought that up, because that was something that once again, there's another point they did so well in the first episode of this, was just show not only how evil the Fire Nation is, how powerful like the helplessness that all of the, like, and once again, we'll get into this as we go through the show. I don't know, just the sheer ability of the Fire Nation and the command and the iron fist that it's ruled with. They do such a great job in such little, you see it in Zuko a lot of just this, and obviously he's got his story, but this desperation and of just making sure that it gets done. Like nothing else matters. It gets done. And they do such a great job of painting that picture.
No, I completely agree on that front. And it is just really great to be able to see that. And last week I spoke with T.D. Orell, who's an author, and we just touched on the subject of show, don't tell in writing and in a show. And I feel like last week's movie didn't do that great of a job, like showing everything that was going on in the world. I feel like Avatar does that. Like it showed, like you said, it shows how powerful the Fire Nation it is. It shows how helpless the rest of the other nations are feeling at this point. And it also shows that our main characters are kids. Like they're not.
Yeah.
Like I'll say this is full transparency. I have not seen the live action Netflix TV show, but something that I do hear consistently is that a lot of that joy and humor that was in Avatar is not there. And I feel like that's such a disservice. Like you can make something as visually beautiful as possible. You can make a show that's just truly amazing. But if you don't have that, like the humor is almost half the show.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great humor in that.
But is there anything else that we want to discuss for these first two episodes? Or are you ready to move on to the second two?
Yes. I think this was a big point for me, actually, when I was looking at it, and I was like, you know what? I keep referencing other TV shows, and I think this is the most important. You cannot convince me, cannot tell me otherwise, that the Fire Nation is not based off of Super Saiyans. Because those guys Kamehameha all the time. Like all of their hand movements they are sending their Kamehameha. So is this Dragon Ball? I don't know. Find out on the next episode.
I'm pretty sure it was before.
Oh, for sure. Dragon Ball is a lot older than this. But I'm talking, is it in the same universe? I'm here to make that argument.
Oh, geez.
I'm here to make this argument.
Is this like... Well, I will let you make that argument. I'll just say that. I will neither confirm...
You're telling me that the Grand Kai isn't an avatar?
I feel like I need an expert on this subject because I am definitely not equipped to answer that.
All I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. But no, anyways, that's kind of it. That's kind of all I have to say.
No, that's awesome. We'll go ahead and move on to the second chapter, which is episodes 3 and 4. The third episode being the Southern Air Temple, and the fourth episode, the Warriors of Kyoshi. Aang's return to the Southern Air Temple is filled with both excitement and apprehension. He discovers the temple destroyed and learns the devastating truth about the fate of the Air Nomads. Zuko encounters Zhao, who vows to capture the Avatar and surpass Zuko. They engage in an Agni Kai, and Zuko wins, but Zhao attempts to assassinate him. Iroh intervenes and reprimands Zhao. Aang visits Kyoshi Island to ride the elephant koi, but is captured by the Kyoshi warriors. He proves himself as the Avatar, gaining popularity and creating tension with Katara. Sokka trains with the warriors, and Aang's actions inevitably alerts Zuko, leading to an attack on the island and burning most of the people's homes. Aang uses the Unagi to save the island as they escape. So the Southern Air Temple is one of those episodes that I was mentioning that it gets dark like quick in it. And it's one of those things that you don't really see coming in both storylines, like with the Zuko storyline and with Aang's storyline. Just because I think they really do try to make an effort. Like, again, Zuko is probably top 5 favorite fictional characters of all time for me. So, like, I'm trying not to make this a this show about Zuko, but they did such a great job introducing Zuko in the first 2 episodes. And then in episode 3, I think they do a great job establishing like, no, Zuko actually like is a small piece in this large imperial empire that's like, he's definitely not the scariest shark that's out there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think that's really well said. And I think it, even on that topic of, you were mentioning earlier, show, don't tell, they do a lot of that. I think these 2 episodes, it gets interesting because once again, this is, there truly is almost a episode to episode growth in these characters that you see, in that light and dark that you see them play with. They do that quite a bit in the show where it's one or two, and they said that where you can tell that this show was watched every week, right? There's not there's a continuation, but not like you could have missed one of these episodes and not really missed any key points in the plot. And you notice that a lot through this whole entire show once again, but it's just, they do such a good job once again. They just ever so slightly building the characters. And I'm glad you brought Zuko up because I think he's the most important character in the show because without him, there is, where there's no one pushing these kids from wherever they go, because that becomes a lot of the show. And I think it's the art of the villain is probably one of the hardest things to write. You know what I mean? Especially now, how do you make someone a villain when, you're everything's been played out to a big extent. And even then, Zuko, they do such a good job of not making him scary. And that's what I like. He's not scary. He's not frightening. Like, that's, as the main, villain in this, per se, what they do such a good job of is keeping him human, but like a very hateable human. Like, everything you hate about him has nothing to do with his power, right? It's purely the way he acts, the way that he chases, the rudeness to his uncle, the way he commands the men. They do such a good job of humanizing him in a way that makes you hate him, not because of power. And so even though you find out that he doesn't really matter in the big scheme, it's like, I still hate that kid. Like, that kid, like, just the absolute, he has more cringe moments in this show where you're just like, ooh, that's uncomfortable than anyone else. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because I think Zuko is the most important character in this entire show.
Oh, for sure. And I probably should have brought this up in the last chapter, but I think you just dived into like a very good point where, yes, Zuko is like, he is like a force to be reckoned with, and he's causing problems for Team Avatar. But they did a great job of establishing like, okay, he actually is a pretty badass warrior. Mm-hmm. He, like, when he fights Sokka, he beats Sokka with ease. Like, I don't think he even uses his firebending. Like, he just strictly uses his martial arts. But on the flip side, in each one of these encounters, Aang defeats Zuko, like, and I don't think Zuko ever really defeats Aang in these fights. And even though they get pretty epic at times, like, it's always Aang trying to run away rather than, like, if he wanted to, he could have killed Zuko several times.
Yep, I was going to say that. I was like, Avatar could have been 2 episodes long if Aang actually just did what he's capable of doing.
Yeah, but Aang's a monk. He doesn't want to kill. Like, he barely wants to fight. So Zuko does survive. Like, there's a lot of, it's, I really need to set up a rule that I can only talk about Attack on Titan like once every 10 episodes or something like that. But there's a lot of similarities that I see between Zuko and Rhaina in the show. Like, they both, like, Rhaina is considered like this, spoiler alert for all of those who have not seen Attack on Titan. Rhaina is seen as a very terrifying villain up until you see Eren beat him over and over. And like, I don't think you ever see, when they're in their Titan forms, Rhaina ever beat Eren.
And never a straight up clean fight.
Yes.
And that's a whole other talk for like, but I agree. And I think, and once again, you have to look back at it, but it's so interesting, is the childishness in which Aang beats Zuko every single time. He almost never, like, you see him, he never takes any any of the fights he almost has like that serious. Like it literally looks like a big brother, little brother situation where it's just like, you can't catch me, you know, and you see that a lot. And I agree. It's definitely one of those things that's just like an interesting topic, especially when you look at the actual power scale that Aang has, and especially when you know, this is super out of it, but like if you look at the greater scheme of outside the series of the avatars, and Aang being arguably, you know, a top 5 out of all of them most powerful, and once we get to the end of that. And so it's interesting that the story needs to happen. You know what I mean? And that's really what makes it so fun.
Yes. No, I completely agree with that. And I think that's really what we're starting to see in these next 2 episodes of just really developing into these points.
Yeah.
But one thing I actually just wanted to, I feel like we keep circling back to this show don't tell, but when we're like, the thing that was most visually like, oh shit, like this is what's going on, is when we see Zuko in his boat pulling up to the dock. It's showing like all of their fleet, and there are these huge ships, and then it gets to Zuko's ship and it's a third of the size of the other ships at that point. And
yeah, you're super right about that. They do such a great job with that imagery. And I mean, even when you look at that showdown, right, and him meeting up and his uncle there, and I think this show does such a good job foreshadowing, and not, you know, once again, the topic of show don't tell in different versions of, they tell pieces of the story as you go, and so you always are interested in what's going to happen, and that's what's once again interesting about the storytelling in it. Truly, is it's so segmented. If you watch, I could watch an episode from chapter 3 and watch it out of order, and it probably would make sense, right? If I put it out, like, you could be like, okay, like that kind of makes, like, that checks out. But at the same time, like, it's all just adding up to like this bigger picture. And I think it's such an interesting way that they do it through the showing, like, you know, we haven't gotten into the talk yet, and we'll wait for that. But like, even so, like, for example, you know, Zuko, like he's yelling at his uncle in the first episode, and his uncle's like, you need to relax, you need to practice your basics, right? And then that comes back, and it ends up being the thing that wins him. And so they do so much of that in the show. The one thing I'll give Avatar credit for, and I think this will be like my last points on these 2 episodes, they will weave a string through the episodes, and they do not care how long it is before you see the weave again.
yes,
But they will connect it. And they'll wait, they'll give you 5, 6, 7 episodes before something comes back up that was actually important to the plot.
yeah, the payout's going to be big.
Sure.
There is one, like, I feel like we haven't talked too much specifically about the Kyoshi Warrior episode.
Oh yeah, you're right.
No. Like, what I really want to dive into, as I mentioned, we saw that Sokka has like a level of like misogyny and sexism towards Katara, but I feel like this is the episode where we actually see the growth. And I feel like there's so many like, I'll admit, like, there's so many pieces of media where you feel like they're just trying to be preachy to you. Like, they're not like
Marvel.
yeah. They think they're actually like, they believe that this is like their movie or their show is a piece of social justice, and they're making a difference. While this whole interaction, I think, is actually more helpful and meaningful, but they're doing it in a storytelling based way, and they're not trying to put themselves on a pedestal, because they're showing that Sokka really is like, at first Sokka is like, yeah, I think he literally says, girls, they sew, guys, they hunt and fight, and that's just what we're good at. And like, throughout the episode, like, he's getting his ass handed to him by the Kyoshi warriors. And I think he specifically says the line of like, I should have been treating you as a warrior instead of treating you like a girl. And it's just to see that level of growth. And it's not like Sokka is now a male feminist, like he's over here. But it's,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's really well said. And I think that episode, I brought it up because we kind of went off of it, just touches on the progressive, you know, things again. But they also touches on some very, once again, nuanced human jealousy and afraid. And like that episode, if you watched that in 2005 when it came out, you know the feeling of like, I like this girl, but like I don't want to say, like when when that girl you think is cute sits next to you and you're like, like they give that feeling so well, and they play up, like once again they play into that whole human side of it so well in that episode. And then once again they do make the Kyoshi warriors look like absolute badasses as well. And they do some cool things in showing some traditional stuff, like the garb and the makeup, and doing that in a way that is respectful and tasteful, honestly, especially for 2005.
Oh, for sure. I completely agree. And I feel like I know the term toxic masculinity gets thrown around quite a bit. And I think that this show actually does one of the best jobs on addressing what it actually is, because I know there's so many people, like, again, I know this show really tries not to be like, oh, it does like a really great job of saying, hey, this is what like when people say negative, like toxic masculinity, this is what we're referring to, just the traditional bro who's like talking down to women and thinking that he's better just because he got a dick. That's.
No, I agree. They do. And I think because a big part of it is it's not forced.
Yes.
It really does. And I think that's, once again, lends itself to the storytelling of it. Makes sense. Like, if you were going to have an island of really badass female, like, warriors, and you're going to put this, like, small tribe, like, honestly, in all sense, kind of useless, useless, and once again, you put a 16-year-old boy, that, like, misogyny peaks at 16.
Yeah, Reddit will tell you that.
Yeah, like it really, like, you know what I mean? Like you're in, and so it just does, and once again, I think it's a pretty good foreshadowing for his character arc as well of, which I don't want to ruin it, but Sokka truly is the character of, like, he doesn't learn anything till he humbles himself.
Yes.
Right? Like it's almost interesting of him and Katara on opposite, right? Like Katara needs more ego in some ways, right? Like she's trying to, you need to stand up for yourself. You need to do this. And Sokka needs the opposite, where he needs, every time he humbles himself, he becomes a much better warrior. But it takes him, strings of time to do so, before he does that. It gets to that greater point.
But just like you said earlier, with just the weave and just the payout, I feel like that's definitely one of those where you're seeing that, and it's the payout of seeing Sokka overcome these just personal humbling trials is so. And I think that, again, it's all relatable. I feel like we all have been, like, whether we want to admit it or not, we've all been at that point where Sokka's at, or we've all felt like each one of these characters, one of these issues that they go through, we can relate to the problems. And for being a fantasy action adventure TV show, a lot of their issues, a lot of their problems are just very relatable.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I get 100% agree. And the last thing I would say on this that I do think I really enjoy about it is, although that in the first book, especially, it really does a good job of showing you their issues and how they overcome them in a moment, but they truly don't make any growth. Like, if you look at Sokka, I think at the end of the episode, like he has this like big growing moment, but he almost always immediately resorts back.
Yes.
And you see that in like big episodes of, he goes right back to who he was, but that seed has been planted. And I think you see that in Aang, both dealing in some of the stuff, like he learns this lesson, but he almost immediately goes back to being this weaponized incompetence. And I think you see that on a lot in all the male characters in this TV show. A lot of the female characters have a lot different of that growth pattern, but I think in the male characters, you just see that across the board, honestly.
So that's actually something I want to touch on real quick, and just something in media that I've recognized and seen. Have you read Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archives book? It's a fantasy series. Well, without spoiling or going into it, there's one character in particular who essentially has schizophrenia, and she has a lot of, like, obviously that's something that she's going through, but she has so many of these issues that are tied to it. And when I was first reading the book, I was like, man, like, she's going through all these problems, but she went through the same exact problems in the last book. Why do they keep going back to this and revisiting it? And I was voicing this to a friend of mine that was reading it, and they were just like, hey, like, in real life, do you go through a problem and never have to go through it again? Like, no, like there's things in your life where you're struggling with it and you might come up with a solution, but that doesn't mean you're not going to go through it next week or next month or next year. Like, it's going to consistently be something that's brought up. So, and when they said that to me, I was like, wow, that's actually very profound and like meaningful. So yes, it can feel like some of these messages are something that characters have to relearn, but if that's not the most human thing, I don't know what is.
Yep, I was going to say that. And that's, and then, it lends itself to the humanizing of the characters. Because once again, it's, and I think, the bending not being magic, back to that point, I think it's because they do such a good job of bringing these characters down to earth and giving them such earthly problems. You know what I mean? Like even Aang, who's the most powerful, it really skims over that fact, and it becomes his own personal problem with power and things like that. So yeah, no, I think they do a great job of that, and especially so early in the series.
No, I completely agree. One thing that I do like, I don't feel like let's actually talk about the bending real quick. I don't think we really talked.
Yeah, we haven't really gone into the bending.
Like something that I do appreciate, one, because they keep emphasizing this is not magic. Like this is its own thing. And if you look at Wikipedia, the way they described it is like it's a telepathy power over. They have masters over these elements, but you can see like Katara doesn't really have control over it at all. And we will get more, like, as the show goes on, we'll see how she gets control, but she really isn't able to do too much with her bending because she hasn't practiced. Katara really doesn't have that much control over it, but it's because she hasn't learned the moves. And they've really tried to emphasize that bending is tied to these almost martial art moves, and the more you have the better control of it, the better of a bender you are. So I actually really like that aspect of it, where it's not like magic where you can just say some words and throw your hands up and you can do crazy things. It takes that hard work, it takes that dedication, and especially when bending is one of these hard magic systems, I really appreciate that there's a very clear line of showing you how you get good at this. Like, yes, there is a level of like natural born talent, but you also have to strive and work towards it. And again, I
agree. I think, and not only without getting too far ahead of ourselves, I think they do a good job because they actually do bring up magic later, but in the sense of like it's almost like black magic, right? Like it's an evil bending. In some of the dark sides of those bending styles, I think they get into later. And I think it's an interesting thing, right? Because it's, once again, they show, but for most of the, the first almost while, you really, they give you glimpses of what earthbending looks like as people moving rock, like very casually they throw it in without any absolute showing of that at all. And so they do such a great job of just almost flirting with the idea, but giving no, like I said, like you mentioned, like, Katara keeps dropping the water on Sokka, right? And there's a couple other times where he gets actually hurt. And there's other moments like that with Aang for sure, right? Like he is scared of his bending. And so I think they do it's a good job where it's not like there's some other shows of similar where there's not friendly fire on. And I think that's such a fun aspect of the show.
No, I agree. There's just so, like, I love this show so much. Here's my question for you. How many times do you think you've watched it all the way through?
3 times for sure.
3 times for sure? I'd say that's probably, if we're just talking since it's been on Netflix, I've probably seen it about 3 times as well. But I also know that I watched it when we were downloading it.
That's what I mean, 3 times on Netflix as well. I'm right there with you. And I think that this is a very absolutely nothing to do with anything we're talking about point. But I think it's important, once again, when you think of, you look so ready for this information. You're both scared and ready for this information.
I'm like,
you're gonna love where this goes. But I think, I mean, even as an adult, but as a kid, when I think back, I'm like, of powers that you wish you could have, bending is up there, right? Like every kid's imagined having the force and like imagined forcing a soda over to themselves. But like they do such a good job of making the bending look like something so cool and something you definitely would want to try, because that's, like I said, like, it's up there. It's up there. I would say the bending, the force, and I think once again I gotta throw, as a kid, Dragon Ball, like everyone wanted to have that, but it's, and again, this makes me think of another great point of their power is their power system truly is effort based, right? It's not like, if you think like once again I think I bring up Dragon Ball, um it's just purely them working, right? There's always a training arc, and really a lot of Avatar is a training arc. And I think once again, if you get into the fantasy world, and this dips into that, there's a lot of times they're in the search for its power in something, right? Something or someone is going to grant them this power. And my brain goes to Lord of the Rings. You look at I go to Game of Thrones. You're looking at, like, they have the evil red witch, and she does these, and so you're looking at these other things. And once again, Avatar does such a good job of, like, only person that has access to that ability, to which we haven't got into, is Aang, in the ability to, like, power up quickly, in a sense of, like, the information. Everyone else is purely effort based.
Yes.
And once again, you don't see that a lot in the fantasy world in general. And I think that Avatar, especially when it came out, I think it's a little more common theme. I mean, I look back, I think of Akira, like they were given this power. And now they're trying, there was not a lot of TV shows out at the time where hard work was truly the only way to power up.
Yes. And I think it's also just one of those things that we can, like, especially just being in America, and there, like, you can make the argument that just, especially for children, sports is just it's such a big part of just American childhood development. And it's the idea of, like, everyone, I feel like most of the people that I've talked to have played a sport, and they understand, like, the more you work towards it, the better that you're actually going to get. Like, there will be outside circumstances that make it so you're not able to really progress. But at the end of the day, it's not necessarily
You're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, like, obviously we met in the gym and training, so like I think it's easy for us to say. But yeah, I think it's one of those. Once again, I think what Avatar does so well is just touch on what would be great values, and they implement them in realistic ways. Like Aang doesn't work hard for a long time in this series, and a lot of the other characters you see do. I think you see that in, both Sokka, his sister, they work hard throughout the whole, entire, you just see that, and you see it pay off. Whereas in a lot of ways, Aang obviously had to learn the skill of bending, but the power was there.
Yes. I'm really excited, especially once we get I'm excited for this entire section, this entire show that we're going to be doing, because I love this show.
Yeah, same.
2 weeks from now, when we talk about the finale, I'm really excited because we'll be talking more about Katara being as great of a waterbender compared to what Aang is. And
I think she surpasses him, actually.
Yeah, like, again, we'll dive into it, but she does surpass him. Like, for the longest time during this show, she's just trying, and Aang's almost like coming at it easy. And like, there's just so many of these messages in the show that really just resonate with me. One of which of, like, hard work will always beat, like, talent, like, but talent and hard work makes you unstoppable. Like,
yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. And once again, it's just there's just so many fun things to this. Like, I just like, and I think that's one thing that I like about the show is they do the fun ideas they do. Like, you watch Aang just goof around with airbending like all of us would.
Yeah. No, I feel like we could do an episode just strictly talking about the personality traits that are associated and just the different things to each one of the elements. And, like, one thing, like, again, I don't want to dive too much because I feel like there'll be a good opportunity later down the road to talk about this, but everyone is like, oh, well, naturally the Fire Nation are the bad guys. Like, fire is... I'm like, no, like, I don't think it is. You can just say naturally fire, because each one of, like, the other elements has... How many people have been killed by water. Like, how many people have drowned? Like, drowning, if you ask people some of the worst ways that are like common to die, drowning sounds like one of the worst ways to go out, because on average it's going to be 3 minutes of you thrashing around for your life and you can't. Or like, yeah, like the wind is like carefree, but I'm sure all of our Midwesterners can tell us that tornadoes are not something to be messing with.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think that they do such a good job of showing how dark those can get. I mean, once again, hate to force it, but like the blood bending. And I don't even know if they actually refer to it in the show, but there's actually, so with Avatar, they in the comic book, they have these, and then each, I think, character has its own books and each thing. And they actually talk about how and this is once again, what's so fun about this universe is we're seeing such a glimpse of it, where it's like, yeah, obviously the firebenders are the evil ones, but like the reason the airbenders are the way that they are is because there has been some of them that came through that were so violent and so cruel, right? And did and get into that, and you see that on both sides. And so I think it's such a fun universe to play around in, because once you get deep into this show, you really start to understand that like that these are universal reoccurring conflicts, but also you get to see how one person took what was a really helpful, and then started taking over.
Yes.
And it's such an interesting, just an interesting TV show, the way they do it in such a childlike way.
No, for sure. Again, I know this is Legend of Korra, but just going back for people that want
I refuse to watch it.
It's all right.
That he's not my bender. Not my Maha. It's not my bender. I refuse to watch Korra out of pure hate because watching I'm not gonna ruin this. I'll just know this point's coming back.
Okay.
In like 2 weeks, I will see you, and we will finish what we started.
Okay, deal. But in Legend of Korra, one of the villains is an airbender, and he kills this woman by sucking the air out of her lungs and then forming like a prism around her head and making her suffocate. And I'm like, that is
freaking crazy.
Yes, like that's
crazy behavior.
Evil. That's crazy insanity. Like, yes, fire is so easy to make the villain, but they could have done villains for any one of the 4 nations. And I think actually throughout the show, they do show like a villainous aspect to each and every one of the nations, with exclusion of the Air Nomads because of the whole like,
they're gone. They gone, not home. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think they do. And I mean, even with them, I think they actually, there are some points in the show where they actually, mentioned how that there was, but I mean, once again, there was downsides to everything that happened. They were like, I think that's one thing, once again, that's really interesting, is like that they make the Fire Nation so evil, but you see in both like Uncle Iroh pretty early, like he's using it to heat tea. And then once again, like they show positive and negatives to each element in such a cool way.
There's a particular episode that I'm excited for us to dive into. It's not going to be this week, but it's when Aang starts to learn about fire bending. And I actually am really excited to dive in because there's a lot of valuable things. But we have actually spent so much time and I'm not upset that we've spent so much time, but we do have one more section to go over, which is episodes 5 and 6. Is there anything else in episodes 3 and 4 that you wanted to cover before moving on to this last section?
I think we killed it.
All right, let's go ahead and dive in. Episodes 5 and 6. Episode 5 is The King of Omashu, and episode 6 is Imprisoned. Aang visits Omashu, where his childhood friend Bumi used to ride the mail delivery system. After causing some chaos, they are brought before an eccentric king. Aang is revealed to be the Avatar and faces 3 deadly challenges to prove himself. He successfully completes the challenges and discovers that the king is his old friend, Bumi. In Imprisoned, Aang, Katara, and Sokka encounter Haru, a young earthbender living under Fire Nation occupation. Katara helps Haru use his bending to save someone, but Haru is imprisoned when turned in by the person he helped. Katara gets herself arrested to free Haru. Inside the fortress, Katara inspires the imprisoned earthbenders to rebel. They succeed in escaping and fighting back against the Fire Nation, but in the midst of it, Katara discovers her necklace is missing, where it is found by Zuko at the end of the episode. Again, I know I alluded to, but I low-key love that these are the episodes that are back-to-back, because we have Avatar version of Squid Games over here with King Bumi running Aang through the circuit of things. And then again, we just go to this, like, one of the dark sides of war that I don't think like really people talk too much about. Getting a little personal about some of my family history. My grandfather was a POW during World War II and was imprisoned by the Japanese. And he has a biography that he just sort of tells his entire experience. And even though, like, yes, this is a kid's show, some of the things that was being shown and just discussed were like messages that he had, like the level of hopelessness, the level of just like being worked to the bone, just level of like being essentially slaves in a time of war and being oppressed by another nation. It's just so interesting that they took such a message, because they clearly were using inspiration of past things going on, tying it into such a children's show.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that I actually didn't know that about your grandfather. That's super interesting. But it's, you know, the thing that just sticks out to me about this, 6 episodes in, how far and how fast the story moves. Like, you know, if I hadn't watched Avatar in a while and you brought up that episode, I would probably tell you it's in, like, you know, chapter 3.
Yeah.
So they just move the story and the characters along so quickly, which, once again, when you look at the greater storyline of them not having a lot of time, you feel that urgency in the storyline. In you know, they're going in place to place, and they never really stay anywhere longer than a couple of nights, you know, in dealing, or weeks or whatever. And you feel that in the story as they're jumping around. And I think that, once again, you bring up the, like, you know, the first 4, or not the first 4, you know, within the first 6 episodes, there's, you know, 2 very dark, very heavy episodes in which, once again, you see Katara in a complete, like, the way that she steps up and tries to empower the camp, and nobody believes, nobody cares. And in that, you just see, I don't know, once again, it's such a heavy and dark topic, and they do it in really such a plain way. Like, they don't, you know, these people are slaves. They do such a good job of those things, but those topics are so, you know, where it's literally like they're just making coal, and they're imprisoned in a place where nobody can get to them. And the stories that they tell in that time. And once again, this is what's crazy. 4, 5, and 6, that is 90 minutes of television. And they cover so freaking much in such detail. And you really start to see these, like, that development happen so quick. It's, you know, like you said, it really is whiplash going from Bumi, and even the Bumi episode, like, they do such a, like, you know, that you just get so much, you know, bandwidth in those episodes.
Well, and even just go, like, I don't know if you got this feeling, but the King of Omashu episode is the closest thing to a filler episode that I've felt so far. Like, yes, you said that you can take each one of the episodes and throw it in a later time and you'd never feel the same. I feel like this is the very definition of that sort of thing. Like, they could have gone to Omashu they could have gone literally right after the pilot, and they could have gone like right before the finale, and it would have fit in any situation.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think that being on you know, weekly like that schedule, definitely, you see that show up in some of the writing that way a lot, where there is very clear start and finishes. I mean, once again, this is a funny throwback, but, like, man, having a 2-part episode back in 2005 was a game changer. Like, they would pump it up, and you would, like, I don't know, I would treat it like a premiere at home, you know?
Yeah.
I'd get the little chocolate pies from Walmart they had in the front that were just a little bit stale. grandma would pick me up at 2 of those, and we would go down and we'd have ourselves a little party on a 2-part episode. You know what I mean?
That's what they're meant for. That is what you're
Yeah.
supposed to do with those.
Dude, doing that, eating chocolate milk and cornflakes or Cheerios, and we just watched.
Hey,
We studied.
there's no
'Cause
other,
there was no replays.
there was not, unless you had that, unless you were recording, like there was no
Man, if you
replay.
had that TiVo in 2005, you was rich. You was rich.
That you were.
You don't go to Walmart and get a pie and get TiVo in the same sentence, Bryce.
No, I totally get it.
You don't know my story now. But yeah, no, coming back to the story. Yeah, which is funny because I agree with you. I think that they don't do filler episodes. They do like filler, like 10-minute gaps. Because to me, one of the most boring times in this entire show is like the penguin writing.
Yes.
Like, you didn't need to animate all of that.
There's an episode that we're going to be covering next week, which I think is one of their weakest episodes in the show in general. And it's still like a decent episode, but I agree. Like there's not weak episodes. There's weak moments, but not weak episodes. Because even with this King Boom, like I low-key love the quirky humor that was going through. Like it's so stupid, but I even to this day, like will say to Hayden, like, let us leave and just like stupid shit like that. Or like the entire conversation with Bumi and the guard where he's like, throw them in this prison. And they're like, oh, do you want to do the nice one or the bad one? He's like, I want you to put in the newly refurbished one. Like, we really should number these. Like, throw in the one that used to be bad, but is like, okay, this is so dumb, but it's.
Yeah. And I think that's, and I think that's why that episode's so hit or miss with me, because it's like, they do such a good job of creating your, like when they like get imprisoned and they're like going into this, like, where they have to get the key, like you really do have a sense of like, the feeling of like this feels like really hopeless. But then they like, once again, that's what's so funny about it is they make it so pointless in the end.
Yeah.
Like it's very much and that's kind of the joke of it all. But like, and then just for, King Bumi to like, just, all right, take me. And just get absolutely. And the gems that they were trying not to get stabbed on, he's eating.
Yeah. Well, I think that's like, if this was something that was going on, like this is dark. Like this is like, because essentially King Bumi is like slowly killing Katara and Sokka. And yeah, like it's rock candy, but that doesn't matter. Like it's
heavy.
Yeah, it's heavy. Like they fell over that. Like sure, you could make the argument that Bumi wasn't going to let that happen, but like
you couldn't tell that without knowing.
Exactly. Like it's just one of those things. Like, yes, I know we keep saying that this is dark, that this is awful, but this is dark for a kid's show that's like rated for everybody. Like, I'm not saying that this is like, oh my gosh, this is the scariest thing. Something that I really do appreciate, because I know Zuko is the main antagonist at this point. Like, yeah. Zuko is the main villain. However, what he's doing isn't like, I wouldn't say that he is a truly evil character. Like, yes, he burned this the town of Kyoshi Island, and he is just going around, but it's not like this level like the Warden was, where the Warden was just taking pleasure at like firebending people that were coughing when he was talking, or just people that are showing blatant malice. Like, Zuko very much is somebody who is motivated. He's on the wrong side, and he's motivated, trying to redeem his honor. I can't wait for us to talk about where we actually get the lore drop of Zuko, because that's such a good episode. But with that, like, I really appreciate that they really show us how dark and how horrible things, like how bad the Fire Nation actually is to the world, without putting Zuko in that light of being that horrible of a person, if that makes sense.
Well, and that's why it is such an intriguing thing where they do and don't. I think the difference is they do make him look evil. Like, he seems super evil, but they humanize him in a way where they don't with the other characters, right? The other characters, it's like, you don't see the human nature. Like, going back to the episode of the duel, there's the duel where and Zuko wins and he goes to blast right by his head, right? And he goes to the side. He shows this humility and this humbleness and to not do that. And the guy fires back, you coward. Your father would be ashamed of you, which is great because we're coming back to that show don't tell. It builds up, the ominous character that is Zuko's dad.
Yes.
More. But it also, I think, does in a way where you're like, that guy is really evil, but he's very human. And you can start to see that it's more of an emotional reaction and, lashing out than it is pure evil.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that because I think you actually put it a lot better than, because I'm not sitting here like, oh yeah, Zuko did nothing wrong. Like he burned down cities. They built another city. Like no, like Zuko is evil.
What murders?
Exactly. But like, again, that's sort of what I'm getting at with Zuko is like, we get to see that other side because they very well could have just shown like every bad thing he was doing. And we're like, oh man, this guy, but he's going to be a bigger character later down the road. Like obviously Aang is the main character, but you can make an argument that Zuko is like the secondary main character.
I said this at the beginning. I think he's the most important character in the show because if you take Zuko out of this and it's just the Fire Nation, this show gets so boring. If you mentally go, Zuko never happened, they're just traveling place to place, right? Like I think Zuko represents and this is a greater point. I think Zuko represents the impending doom that they feel in the series, right? And I think he matches to how the kids, when he starts lashing out and feels anxious, you see it on the other side, but you see that pressure being put, right? That every time Zuko lashes out and is like, I need to find him, I need to get my honor back, you see on the other end of Aang being like, hey, like, I need to save this, I need to do this, I need to, and so I think that to me, he's the most important. Because truly Aang does not push the story along. Zuko does.
Yes.
If Zuko literally wasn't there pushing them and chasing them out of every place that they go, the story would have stalled, at Kyoshi Warriors a long time,
Yeah.
And so I think that part of it, and where he really does destroy almost every spot that he lands in after those guys are there. And once again, it's just such a, if you want an imperialism topic there, right? These guys show up and all of a sudden afterwards the place is destroyed. Like there's those topics there, but I truly do think he's the most important character because the plot would suck without him. His father alone, it wouldn't be like that. All of it is just wouldn't be right. Wouldn't be right.
I do agree. And there's a quick side note that I just want to say. I know it's a very common thing where you don't show the face of the big villain until the very end. But they do that. They make an effort of not showing Fire Lord Ozai's face until the last season. And this is just, again, like I didn't watch the show on TV. I watched the show by downloading it online.
How you gonna dry snitch?
But just a funny story, like for episode 1 of season 3, it was not on the website that we downloaded it from. So I downloaded episode 2, and you see Aang within the first 3 minutes of the episode hold up a picture of Fire Lord Ozai's face made out of macaroni, and I'm like, this is not how we first see Fire.
That would have been the way to do it. Truly.
Literally the first time that I saw Fire Lord Ozai was a depiction.
That's so funny.
But I was like so shocked. So sorry.
That would have been the way to do it. I have actually just recently realized something, and I think me and you, we need to just start this over.
Okay.
Because we have made a grave mistake.
What did we make a mistake on?
We have not one single time, and I take back what I said about Zuko, he's the second most important character, then it's Aang. We have not once mentioned Appa.
Or Momo.
No. What are we doing? How does that even happen? Do we even watch the show?
I'll say this. I was so interested in bison after watching the show, and then I Googled what a bison actually looked like. I'm like, I'm going back to Avatar. These things suck.
Yeah, seriously. I was like, how do we get this far without mentioning Appa and how awesome Appa is? Like,
Amazing.
Appa is truly the absolute, like, saved by the plot type character. Like, he really does not aid to the plot other than, like, it's a convenient and perfect way for him to travel. He aids nothing to the plot because he is the plot. You know how hard it is to make a useless character the best?
Well, he's like, that's what I'm excited about when we talk about book 2 with the Earth. Like, Appa becomes like the main character for a couple episodes then.
Yeah, and he becomes the key of it. But like, and once again, we'll get into those episodes too, because those are just emotional. Like, there's some episodes that are hard tuggers, but like,
Emotional damage galore.
absolutely. But like, I would wear Appa slippers right now. Like, those are things, and so it's so interesting how it just has to be done well. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to say Appa's a filler character.
No,
But like, in some ways he is. You know what I mean? Like, how convenient is it that the Airbender just lands with a bison that just happens to be able to fly, even though Aang cannot fly, and he happens to be frozen with it, and he happens to need to fly to the North Pole with his friend. Like, it's such a convenient, like they forgot to write it in, and they wrote in the absolute best thing they could. Because, like I said, you look at other storylines where they try to just, they have a giant plot hole, but that plot hole is filled so beautifully by Appa.
the way that I view that is in D&D, sometimes DMs will give their players like an item. Most typically it's a magic carpet where they can just fly around on everything.
Exactly.
And then the DM just realizes like, oh shoot, like this is so overpowered for my party. So I'm going to like set up rules in my head. I won't state any rules, but if they start to try to like abuse it, I'll put them in like, and it's like with Appa, like, why is he not helping out in battle? Oh, he's eating. Yeah.
He's just, gone. Like,
what, this 6-ton like flying creature.
yes. And you're telling me it took Appa what would it be? 2.5 seasons to get to the North Pole? You're telling me that big thing couldn't do it in an episode?
In his defense, it took him only about 18 episodes, but
For the plot, dude. For the plot.
well, they also did establish, and I think that's some, again, I should have dived more into it when they were trying to really relay that Aang is still a kid. Aang does like have all these little side quests that he wants to go, like, oh, I want to go ride the koi. Oh, I want to go.
That's how they killed, yeah.
Like, that's how they determine, like, hey, this is not going to be 20 episodes of him just like, I mean, it could have been like, oh, they fly from point A to point B, 6 episodes. Bada boom, bada bam. But they went ahead and did it. So Aang does have this love of animals. And to be honest, I actually really love that. Like, we talked about this last week where I really enjoy when the main character has like a specific animal that's like their animal to ride. Like last week when we talked about Rhea, she has.
Wait. Now stop. You're telling me that the podcast about big flying lizards, the host just happens to like when the main character has an animal? You're on the same show that started on House of Dragon. Well, yeah. In my America, you're gonna tell lies?
Possibly.
Anyways, non-truther, go on. Humor me.
So the main character of last week's movie has like this armadillo that rolls up into a ball and then like rolls around. And so it's like General Grievous's little thing that he, but like in animal form. And then obviously we have this week where Aang rides a flying bison, and like again, like going back to the world building, I just love that they have like these very creative animals and monsters that
That's actually a great point. That's actually a really good point about that.
like we hardly see anything that's actually in the real world. Like we see like the Fire Nation are riding their rhinos that look like giant lizards, but they have rhino horns. We see that in Kyoshi they have the giant koi fish. And then Aang has the flying bison. Like I love that they're just being so original with their creatures. And obviously, like this is not something we'll be bringing up within these 3 episodes, but later down the line, a bear gets brought up and they're like, what? Like, was it a like a platypus bear? No, was it a sheep? Like they started listing all and they're like, no, it's just a bear. And they're like, that's so weird. Like, and I'm pretty sure it's the only animal.
Yeah, I do remember that actually. Yeah. And that is actually really well said in that fact of like, this could have been a show that was so easy to do lazy. Right. And I think that that's what's so amazing about it is they don't oversell with, the type of characters. They don't try to oversell with the animation. They don't try to, they truly, I think, do such a good job with just being creative. Like, hey, it would be really funny if there's a platypus bear or the giant koi, right? And how it's all of that. Like they do such a good job at just being creative and not letting the universe grow and speak for itself.
Yes. I feel like that's the biggest crime that we see nowadays is shows are just not creative. Like people are just they're just trying to make a buck. And again, I feel like that's one of the overall theme messages of this show is that we love it when people are original with their ideas, because you could make an argument, especially just with this specific, that dragons are not really original. Like people have been having like a lizard that flies and has power literally for thousands of years. So I appreciate it when they are telling these stories in ways that are creative, original, and tying these magnificent beasts into a story that can be appreciated.
And I agree. And I think it's, like you said, it's not being creative for the sake of creativity. Like it lends itself to the show. You see, this is another example that's outside, but like Demon Slayer, right? Like the animation works because it lends itself to the show. One show I've been watching a lot recently that's been really funny to rewatch is One Punch Man.
Okay.
Such a great one, right?
Yes.
But it's I think a lot of people lose track of, there's it's like the joke, do it for the plot. But I think a lot of people get too caught up in building the world before the plot instead of letting the plot build the world. And with Avatar, they do such a great job of letting the plot build the world. Like, okay, you have 4 elements, you have this, and they're on a flying bison. Okay, like, and they just let whatever makes sense for the nations, because they ask the questions like, what kind of animal would live in a Earth nation, and I think they just answer those kind of logically and creative wise, and it really does just lend itself once again for just such a natural filling story.
No, I agree. I feel like we're glazing up this show so much. Like
I'm spinning on it, yeah, for sure.
They're like, and I think that that's really what it comes down to is there's hardly anything we can actually criticize this show on, because even the things that we are going to criticize it, like what we were talking about, where a lot of these characters are having to relearn the same lessons. Like, yeah, on like a knee-jerk reaction, that's a negative thing. But again, just thinking about the bigger picture,
I mean, don't get me wrong. If you wanted to tear the show down, it'd be like, okay, when you drew the Fire Nation boats, it looks like you let a toddler do it. It's literally just a boat with a stock. And then, okay, that's their, what's the stupid arrow for on his forehead? Like, you guys waited 4 seasons to explain that. The whole Appa thing. Like, I want you to understand it. They never one time, more than like a 30-second thing, explain Appa And the fact that, like, and do you know how convenient it is that there's only one Appa left? Like, really? There's only one Sky. Like, don't get me wrong. We could tear this show, and it doesn't mean it's not good. But there's so many like dumb things that are. It's honestly almost like they did it in a funny way, like all of that. But like, there's just a giant saddle for this thing. You know what I mean? And it's just like, just those things that are really silly. And I mean, once again, I'm actually excited to get it. Like, there's like a whole stretch of episodes purely about Appa, and they're great. And once again, love it. But like, there's a lot of like with this show conveniences. You know what I mean? Like, of course that happened.
No,
Like,
I definitely agree. Like, there's a lot of convenience that's left to this show, but at the same time, I have to remind ourselves that this is a kid's show. Like, this isn't an adult. Like, this,
No.
like, it's a kid's show meant for adults.
No, we're not doing that. We're not reminding ourselves of anything.
Because
your knees hurt when you literally said your knees hurt earlier. So, buddy, just like the adults in this show, and just like the adults of yesteryear, we are gonna ruin this for people. We are gonna tear this down.
Well, I mean, I'll let the DMs tell you what they think of that.
The dungeon masters can eat, because guess what? We're tearing it down. We're ruining this show now. This is no longer a positive thing. This is a mutiny. Bryce is no longer the host. You don't know why?
Now,
Because he thinks that we don't know that he likes shows with pet animals. What kind of brandatism are you getting right now? Of course we know you like animals, buddy. If you saw what I'm looking at right now.
well, everybody who's watching right now can see what you're looking at right now.
Exactly. That's like you saying that's being like, yeah, I've never seen Magic the Gathering. Okay, buddy. And then you want to say, what your immediate thought was, well, no, I play Warhammer. Do you know why? Because you take it more serious.
I do.
Serious Magic players are playing Warhammer, and I'm going to stand on that.
Well, I actually think that's a great place for us to leave off.
Yeah, I think so.
Because
I'm gonna get shot at now. There's some guy with a hentai freaking magic pad that is gonna find me outside my house and freaking Luigi me.
I mean, you know that I'm willing to swap my own podcast after all.
Oh goodness, yeah.
But
Yeah,
I do appreciate everybody that has made it with us this far. We will be back next Monday to discuss episodes 7 through 12. And it's going to be a blast. There's going to be a lot more. And Chayce will be joining us again for that. Chayce.
You mean you will be joining us?
Yeah, I'll be joining Chayce for
Mutiny's happening, buddy.
Alrighty. Well, in the meantime then, guys, you all have a great night. Be sure, like, share, subscribe, follow us on our socials, and we will be back next week to talk more Avatar Last Airbender Book 1. But good night, y'all.
That's all for this week's Dragon Lore. Takes cold and hot, spread shore to shore. Enjoyed yourself? Please join the squad. Follow on social media at Big Liz Pod. And one quick reminder before you go, to rate, review, and share the show. Thank you for listening. It means a lot. See you next week, same time, same spot.